the rhetoric. It's gotten very crude and cruel. And sometimes we just need some decency. The thing that we need to think about, I think, what is our culture and society doing that's resulting in this level of disturbance?
Educate, inform, inspire. The Dan Parsons Show, a podcast that lifts up instead of tearing down.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Dan Parsons Show. I'm your host, Dan Parsons. Coming up on today's show, political scientist Dr. Laura Ebke. But before I introduce Dr. Ebke, I wanted to give a shout out to our friends of Dan, our Patreon supporters. For just $5 a month, you can help support the show and the team behind the scenes who make it all possible. And you get some perks, like bonus content from today's episode. So if you're not a friend of Dan, hop on over to thedanparsonshow.com and sign up. Okay, here's my interview with Dr. Laura Ebke, Senior Fellow at the Platte Institute. Enjoy. Well, hey, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the Dan Parsons Show Dr. Laura Ebke, a former Nebraska State Senator. She's a political scientist and a Senior Fellow at the Platte Institute. Laura, welcome back.
Hey, Dan. Nice to see you.
Hey, before we start, just my public apology for bugging you, texting you on your vacation last week.
That's quite okay. You happened to catch me. I think the original text came in while I was up in the mountains and didn't get anything, so I responded kind of late, I think. So.
Well, you were kind to respond and set the tone for this conversation, so I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, and also before we start, I want to encourage our audience to subscribe to Musings from the Porch, your insightful writings on Substack. All the cool kids are on Substack these days.
Yeah, I don't understand Substack really, but I'm over there and, try to get something posted every other day or so right now. Just sort of whatever I'm thinking about. I told folks that I started out doing that when we got our new dog and, I was taking her out early in the morning and having my cup of coffee on the porch. And it's like, well, I might as well make use of this time.
Yeah. No, I like it. And in fact, that was part of the motivation of me reaching back out and we'll get to that in a moment. But before we get to some of those items that we originally had said we were going to talk about, just all the crazy headlines from this past weekend. And I wanted to get your take on, first of all, there was huge numbers of people attended protests around the country last weekend. And the president hosted his military parade in conjunction with his birthday, also this past weekend. Organizers for the protests, the No Kings rallies across the country, I've seen estimates of like 5 million people may have participated around the country. There's events in Lincoln and Omaha and maybe other places in the state. And the people I've talked to, I didn't attend, but people I've talked to said but they were, first of all, nonviolent and, upbeat and positive and filled with hope. And so anyway, I just wanted to get your thoughts on those protests and events.
Yeah, I wasn't at them either. I was driving. But just the reports that I saw took me back in time to, the 2007, 2008, 2009 Ron Paul era that I was a part of. In the Republican Party and, again, of the Tea Party movement,
Yes.
The beginnings of the Tea Party movement. And, I attended quite a few of those back in the day. And those were always nonviolent. They tended to be pretty upbeat. You made good friends. And it seemed to me like that's what these, for the most part anyhow, seemed to be. They had a defined time. They were, show up, hold your sign, wave at people and then disperse. And so I don't think that it was I think it was ultimately very American, and very encouraging that folks were, that folks are out there speaking their minds.
You mentioned the Tea Party movement, and for our audience that doesn't know, you're former Republican, kind of libertarian, registered, I believe, as an independent these days. And But you came out of that Republican movement, as did I. I grew up a Reagan Republican, and so things are obviously different now. But maybe compare that movement of the Tea Party that led to what we have now eventually, but there was a movement. And is this an indication of now the pendulum swinging back the other way, and enough people being upset of the current administration that they're taken to the streets?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different group of people, I think.
Yes.
But I think that the impetus is very much the same. I mean, if you think about what the Tea Party movement was about, it was really sort of an anti-Obama, anti-big state. I mean, that was sort of the impetus behind it. And the kind of anti-Bush Republican, big state, pro-war, and that sort of thing. So they were out there trying to get smaller government, less nationalization and that sort of thing. And I think in many ways, it's the No Kings movement is very similar. It's just aimed at a different, at a different set of kings, if you will. I think that in the late 2008, 2009, early Obama, 2010 Obama era, that it was a lot of kind of libertarian conservative Republicans who were out there marching because they thought that Barack Obama was going to take away our guns and make government big again. I think that now you just have a different group of people complaining about many of the same things. Big centralized government, wars, and that sort of stuff. I think are all sort of tied into this. I think that we Americans, regardless of our professed ideology, all kind of get our hackles up when it comes to certain issues, and we just tend to express it more vocally when somebody on the other party is in the other party is fussing about stuff.
Yeah. Well, it does seem to me that there is a resistance, opposition forming. I mean, obviously, anytime whatever party is in control of government, either the White House or in this case, the White House and both branches of the legislature in Washington, there's always that, opposition party that forms. But this seems to be growing pretty quickly, pretty fast, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And I think it's, I think that in large part, it's just a change in interpersonal dynamics that we have in the country. I mean, I was reading an article a little while ago about, one of the heroes of the Tea Party era when, in the early days was Mike Lee.
Yeah.
I was reading this article about how Mike Lee is now, sort of one of the enemies of the somebody. I don't know exactly. I don't even know how to define people anymore because it's like the world is turned upside down and the labels don't really mean anything. But I think that I do think that like I said, I think that it has picked up steam. Part of it is that social media has gone so crazy, and it's easy to escalate. It's a lot easier to escalate now than it was in 2008 when we had limited Facebook. I mean, it's hard to think about.
It's true.
We had even limited Facebook back then, but the big thing that the way we organized was through meetups. We didn't have the billions or millions of people that were on X or Twitter or whatever, and so I mean it's just a different dynamic.
Yeah, that's true. The other national event over the weekend I wanted to get your thoughts on, which if we think all of that was bad, it took a very serious, horrific turn on Friday when the assassination of the Speaker of the Minnesota House and her husband, and the shooting, nearly another assassination, the shooting of another state legislator and his wife. Thankfully, the suspect has been apprehended and is facing state and federal charges for first-degree murder and other charges. But as a former lawmaker, that starts to kind of get pretty close to home, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I think as a state legislator, you don't really think about being all that in all that much danger. You're not in the national public eye as a general rule, and you don't think that your neighbors are that dangerous, really. I was interested. I think it was in the New York Times. I saw an article that suggested that this guy had a whole list.
Yeah, like 70 names. Yeah.
I think that's scary. It also raises new questions, I think, from the standpoint of um, security and things like that. I mean, one of the things when I was in the legislature, there was one suggestion that we ought to tighten up security in the Capitol. Anybody can walk in.
Yeah.
And some of us really railed against that. It's like, no, this is people's house. They ought to be able to walk in and all this sort of stuff. Well, I would not be surprised to see, new efforts around the country and certainly in Nebraska to try to tighten that up again, especially while things are in session and so forth.
Yeah. Scary times. Well, and again, it just kind of lends to this dialogue or this situation that we have of just the continued escalation from rhetoric that is mean and cruel and harmful, and now actually to violence. And it's a sad time. And I think a lot of us are just, as you mentioned earlier, where's the bottom? It's really difficult to watch for those of us who have been in politics most of our lives.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I think that I think what you mentioned about the rhetoric and so forth is absolutely true. It's gotten we've gotten very crude and cruel, and I can come up with all sorts of crude, cruel, and crass. I don't know, but I think that it is. It's unfortunate. I saw, sometimes we just need some decency, and we don't need to, right away turn a terrible event into a criticism of the governor of a particular state,
Yes.
or we don't need to right away make something political when we don't know if it is. And so, while an assassination of a lawmaker is, certainly a political, a political target, we don't need to, people were jumping. I was just in and out of cell service, so I didn't get all of the good stuff, I guess. But people were speculating all over the place, that it's a false flag. It's it's a leftist. It's a communist. It's a conservative. I mean, somebody that's obviously probably really very disturbed. And, the thing that we need to think about, I think, all the time is what is our culture and society doing that's resulting in this level of disturbance where somebody even contemplates that. And, there's always going to be some, but it does seem like it's becoming more and more common and more excused.
Well, yeah, let's face it, the last presidential campaign, and again, there's so damn many awful things that have happened, but the last presidential campaign, there was 2 attempts on a candidate's life, for crying out loud. And we just kind of shrug our shoulders, I guess, and go on to the next disaster. And so, and again, we look back in the 60s and how volatile that was, and the terrible loss of life, of assassination of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King, and that was in the Vietnam War. And that, we forget, those of us who were alive still then, back then, of just how volatile that was for the country. And so, yeah, we've been through hard times before, but this does seem to be approaching some of the worst moments in our country's history. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's move on to some fun topics, but we're going to keep going. Okay. Laura, I wanted your thoughts. And again, you motivated me with your Substack post. Where are the violent criminals? I think was your title. And so your thoughts on this immigration crackdown across the country, and right here in Nebraska. Again, while you were gone, as you know, there's a raid in Omaha, a company, and the detention of dozens, I believe, of people who could not prove their citizenship. And Anyway, just your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things that we all have to remember is that while we would all like for everybody to come legally with documentation, because it makes everything easier if everybody's got documentation, right? That many of those folks are coming here to build a better life, and they are they're escaping some really horrific either economic or political circumstances in their home countries, and that they're trying to build a life for for them and their families. And what we've seen in a lot of places, I live in Crete, and so we have a significant immigrant population with a meat processing plant as well. We I think that what we do is we forget the humanity of these folks. And then we start calling them criminals. Well, no. For one thing, being here without documentation is not a crime, on the books. It's a civil issue, a civil penalty, but it is not a criminal penalty as we think of felonies or even, high misdemeanors. So if we want to get rid of the worst and those who have committed, heinous crimes and things like that, most of us could agree on that. We don't want to have them around, but actually I'd rather have them tried and imprisoned in the United States rather than than just deported, and not have to face justice here. But I think that, we really need to think about how we're treating folks. And maybe what we need to think about is the fact that, our system is broken. It's just a broken immigration system, in my view.
And one Congress after the next, whether it's Democrat or Republican, have not been able to solve this problem. And so now we've got Trump that, the day he came down the escalator, however many years ago now, I think it's 10 years ago now. Yeah. Somebody told me. It's been about his emphasis of getting and again, the rhetoric is just very, very harsh, getting these criminals out of here. But again, not equating, as you've described, these people that have been in the country for years and years and years. And, we've just kind of looked the other way, and now they're part of our communities. They're doing the jobs that a lot of us don't want to do. But at the same time, they're ingrained in our communities, in our churches, in our schools, and part of our economy. And now, instead of, as he said, going after those worst of the worst, the murderers and the rapists, and, which I think all of us agree need to be held accountable. Now we're quickly ramping up and trying to meet these quotas, apparently, of just coming in and raiding these businesses and just causing fear across the country.
Right. And I think that the quotas, the kind of quota system is based on just going out and getting the easy ones. Yeah. The people who are minding their own business. I think on that post I had a bear. The bear was just minding its own business. Nobody was bothering it. It didn't bother us. Those are the folks that we ought to just be, they shouldn't be the priority. If anything, they should be the priority for us to help integrate and get legal, help them to get the documentation if they don't have it, and not be going after people who, don't have, who aren't truly a danger to society, and, splitting up families and all that sort of thing. So I think that we need to really think about, how we address these problems. But I think that the current administration has made it very easy to scapegoat folks and to blame others for all of the problems that we see, to the extent that we see problems, I guess, in our country, or to blame them for perceived problems. And we forget that a lot of those folks are, picking our fruit and vegetables and cutting up our meat, and what happens when they're not around. And the president has apparently seen that.
Yes, he's hearing it
because yes. He's what do they call it? Taco
Trump
he's
always
talked over
chickens
the
out. Yes.
yeah, because he has now issued, an exemption for ag workers, meat process. It's like, oh, it's hard to keep track.
Well, it is, and we could get into the tariffs thing too, but yes, I mean, one day the policy is this, and the next day it's that, and I think he's responding to a lot of the base of his constituency, the ag economy, for example, and the meatpacking industry and others that are saying, wait a minute, Mr. President, let's figure out a different way to do this than to put us out of business. And the trickle down effect is going to be, what's it going to do to our economy? There has to begin to be impacts on our economy and shortage of product. And
right. For sure. I mean, I think that when, if that were to continue on, and we saw, between the tariffs and the economic impact of ag workers, what kind of empty shelves do we see?
Yeah. The legislative session. I don't know how closely you follow, again, in your role at the think tank. I assume you had some things that you were watching, but maybe just your overall thoughts about the session. I mean, I think the headlines that came out of the session was primarily led by GOP state senators denying the will of the people at least 3 times from ballot issues. And so, anyway, your thoughts on the legislative session?
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about this, and to be fair, back in the day when I was in the legislature, my first year, I got convinced to carry that youth minimum wage bill. It didn't pass. And in retrospect, I'm glad it didn't, because, as a freshman legislator, it was the last day of session, and somebody handed me the bill, and, it was somebody who had donated to my campaign. I said, sure, I'll introduce it. Didn't realize how controversial it would be. But I think that, and this is always going to happen, when there's an initiative and then there's some cleanup work that the legislature has to do. But I think that that this legislature, it feels like, anyway, that they were that as a whole they were trying to, I don't know, roll back everything that the citizens had decided. Whether you agree with what the citizens as a whole decided was correct or not is irrelevant. And so, I think that in a perfect world, if I could rewrite the Constitution, what I would do, I'd keep that initiative process, but there's a stipulation in there, that says that with a supermajority of 30 votes, that the legislature can change a vote of the people. I would put a time frame in there and not allow it to happen until at least one election cycle has passed, so that it actually does have to go into effect, because this preemptive changing of the will of the people before the bill's even gone into effect seems to me, I don't know, it seems to me there's a lot of hubris involved, that we know better. And that, and we heard that in the legislature. There were senators who said, the people didn't know what they were voting for. Well, maybe the people didn't know what they were voting for, but that's, for one thing, that's awfully, that's awfully obnoxious to say that.
Well, yeah. And did they know what they were doing when they voted for you, Senator? I mean...
Exactly. And I think that the other thing is that, we all have to live with, with the decisions that we make. And so maybe if a law goes into effect and the people decide that it wasn't such a good idea, maybe we don't get so many initiatives efforts anymore. Because that's become the new way of doing business.
Yeah, because the legislature is not being responsive, and so people are taking it into their own hands, and that's been that way. We have a rich history of that, and I know you know that here in Nebraska. And I'm sure you are too, that people are just going to double down. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, damn it. We'll just do this again, and we'll write it in a way, as you're suggesting, that can't be changed.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's, and I think that, and I think, for instance, with the medical marijuana, I think that's one of those areas that, that was a fairly measured, approach. And, I think that they could double down, and we could get a whole lot more than that the next time around.
Oh, you're damn right. You know, the one of the arguments for years has been, well, this is just a way to get recreational marijuana, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? You damn well may get it now because people are pissed. And it would, I'm confident it would pass overwhelmingly, just like the medical would. So, yeah.
It's funny. People who don't even, I go to a dental appointment, and my dentist asked me, he says, as he's got his hands in my mouth, hey, what do you think of this legislature that they keep passing bills to try to overturn the will of the people? This is a professional. This is that was making him mad, and I think that there are others, in our church, in my church, who temperamentally might not agree with some of those things, or experientially, there's small business people and things like that, and may not have agreed with the minimum wage or with the paid medical leave, but they don't like that the legislature is ignoring the will. So
yeah. Well, before we let you go here, Laura, anything else from the Platte Institute that you'd like to highlight, or what have I missed?
We're working on regulatory reform and going to continue doing that. We believe in accountability, and that the legislature ought to continue to exercise oversight of the regulations and know what's being regulated in the legislature's name, which is what, essentially the regulations are all about. We've got our fingers in a lot of things at different times. I'm extraordinarily lucky this year. I was lucky last year too. We had a great summer intern last year, and we've got a great one this year who's doing some work on some things that, we're sort of interested in. So, zoning, in rural areas, and how that affects livestock and things like that. And so he's doing some work on that this summer. So, kind of fun.
Cool. Well, keep us posted, Laura. Always great to chat with you. I know our audience love to hear from you. So, and check out Musings from the Porch on Substack.
Absolutely.
Okay. Dr. Laura Ebke, thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Dan.
Hey, my thanks to Dr. Laura Ebke for joining me today. And thanks for all of your recent comments on TikTok. You've been blowing it up over on TikTok. ABL 1571, Mom of Boys and Boxers, wrote this comment on the Dr. Bob Ronner clip about measles. She said, "Can you imagine if folks had the anti-vax mentality with the polio vaccine? And those people are boomers. Having that mentality is insane to me, given that they survived that." Hey, thanks for the comment. I really appreciate it. If you're not following us over on the TikTok, please join the fun. Hey, thanks to the Parsons team who made this show possible. Chase Porter, executive producer. Ike Simonis, producer and graphic design. Penology, tech solutions for their technical help and equipment. And Kim Remington, Parsons PR's director of operations. And thanks to each of you for your continued support. It really means a lot to me. Okay, that's today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Now go do good things. I'm Dan Parsons.